Welcome everyone. Today I have with us Mr. Faisal Siddiqui, who is the Director of Machine Learning Platform at Netflix. Thank you for taking up the time.
Thank you for
Mr.
having me.
Faisal. And before we go ahead, I would just like you to introduce yourself to the audience in a very brief manner, like your history and a little bit like where have you studied and things like that.
Sure. Thank you, Abdullah. So I'm originally from India, and I was born in Aligarh. And I started my education in Africa. My dad was a visiting professor there in Kenya and Nigeria, but most of my schooling happened in Aligarh. And for a couple of years I was in Delhi, in DPS, and then did my undergrad from AMU in electronics engineering. And after that, I did my master's in electrical engineering from Stanford. And then for the last nearly quarter century, I have been in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I have been, my first decade or so was mostly in networking and distributed systems. And I'd say that roughly the last 8 to 10 years have been in the field of machine learning infrastructure. And I am, as you said, currently heading the ML platform, which is basically the engineering infrastructure team that enables the application of machine learning, and it enables the impact of all ML practitioners at Netflix.
Okay, thank you so much. Now I just have a bunch of questions related to Netflix, related to your industry, related to your work. So I'm just going to throw them at you, and you can respond in a way that you see fit. Okay.
Sure.
So first question: why should someone get a Netflix subscription instead of Amazon Prime or Disney Plus?
Yes. You start with the spicy ones.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, this is a golden age for the creation and consumption of content. There are some amazing stories that are being told. Netflix was one of the first to, we were certainly not the first storyteller or the media company by any standards, but we were one of the first to recognize the value of on-demand television and streaming as the future. So we got a bit of a head start in that, and we were able to get and go global quickly. And now we're producing on in 6 continents, which means that we are generating a lot of opportunity for voices from all over the world to be accessible to people all over the world. And we're ahead in that compared to some of our other competitors. There's amazing content in Amazon and Disney and some of the other players also.
Yeah.
But we just we feel that we have some of the better content.
Okay.
But ultimately, it's the members who vote by their decision to not cancel.
Just in terms of data, does Netflix still has the largest library compared to Amazon Prime?
Largest, I don't know. I don't keep track because these numbers are not widely shared.
Okay.
I know what the catalog size is on Netflix, but I don't know what others are.
Okay.
But I can tell you that from public numbers, we are the biggest in terms of the number of actual paid subscribers, worldwide subscribers. We just released our earnings yesterday, and we're now close to 238 million account holders, households. We are also, at least among the media companies, we are a leader in engagement and a leader in revenue and in profit. So there's something to it. Now, in terms of the preferences of what people like to watch, we always think of there's no one Netflix. It's highly personalized,
right,
and there's a unique show that is only available in one particular geography, but that may be the most impactful and emotional engagement a member has had with us. So it's less about the size of the catalog and more about the quality.
How
of the
relevant
catalog.
it is.
Yeah, I mean there's a little bit of both because you do need a certain degree of depth of catalog. Otherwise, you're done. If it's just one year, if you're just a one show network, then people will just watch it and then they're done.
Yeah.
So we need to have both the quality and quantity.
Correct. That was a good answer. What is the work culture like in Netflix?
Interesting question. So Netflix has been so Netflix's root are in Silicon Valley, but we're obviously a media and entertainment company. So we like to think of ourselves as sort of two big pillars, both technology and media,
Right.
coming together, and that's one of the unique proposition for us. It also therefore required a bit of a unique culture. And so within Silicon Valley, among the tech companies, Netflix has long had a bit of a different culture in that there's a handful of things that we emphasize which are different compared to other tech companies.
For example?
Yeah, so a few examples I would say. Much more within Netflix, you'll hear the term freedom and responsibility a lot. We refer to it as F&R. So there's tremendous freedom that employees have in freedom in terms of decision making, freedom in terms of making choices, but it has to be balanced with the responsibility that they take. So nobody's going to tell them to say, no, you have to write this software in a particular language. You have the freedom to make the right choice if it's a new language that you want to pick up, you're excited about. But at the same time, you also have the responsibility, for instance, to make sure that you have thought about whether it's going to be sustainable. It's what is the community around that language? What are the long-term prospects? So and this is one example, but there are many such things. And there's also context, not control. So managers are encouraged not to be prescriptive, not to tell what to do, but to ask the right questions and provide the context and enable individual contributors to make decisions. So providing the right context, but not being controlling or micromanaging. And a couple other things. Feedback is super valuable. There's a lot of radical candor that is practiced. It's very,
For example?
well, it's very customary for me to go and tell my manager that you're full of shit.
Really?
Yeah, or that you're saying that this does not make any sense, and that culture came from the top. Some people may choose not to use those words, but if somebody says those words, it's not looked down upon. And they say that you should not disagree in silence. If you're disagreeing with something, make it known. But at some point, when an informed captain has made a decision, then you can disagree, but then you have to commit to it and help them execute. So some of these principles are found in other tech companies also, but a couple of those are more unique. Again, the emphasis on freedom and responsibility and context, not control, I think is probably highest that I have observed and talked to my friends who work for other fan companies and things like that. So that's one thing that has been unique about it. Now, it was much more in your face when we were a smaller company. It's a little bit harder when when you're a bigger company. You have people from all over the world. You have offices all over the world. But some of the and I think it's okay for the culture to evolve as the company's needs evolve. But more or less we have maintained a few of these core tenets fairly well, and a far less political organization internally, which is a place where engineers enjoy doing their work.
Okay, so one question is, recently we heard that Netflix is cracking down on users who do password sharing.
Yeah.
So what's the situation on that right now?
Yeah, well, it's good timing you're asking this question, but I can talk about some of the numbers. Look, we were roughly 220, 230 million households worldwide. And by some estimates that we've shared publicly, about 100 million people or accounts are sharing their passwords. And I think it's okay for the way we set up our accounts, the way we set up our sort of pricing structure. One membership is by and large, and it's always been in our terms, but we weren't very explicit or we weren't really enforcing it. That one membership is primarily for one household, and by one household is what you think, not like an extended family of all cousins.
One TV in a nuclear family.
It doesn't have to be a nuclear family, but physically, if you're living in one house,
right.
if there's extended family members living in the same house with you, then that's fine. So as long as it's within one house, any number of people can watch it by and large. But your cousins, your extended family, they should have their own account. Because we weren't explicit about it, we made when we were making the transition, we made it easier for people to transfer into their profiles and all their history and recommendation into a different account. We also gave them, in certain cases, in certain countries, we gave them the option of creating an extra member account, which is slightly discounted. You can think of it as like, I can keep on paying for my daughter who goes off to college as an extra member, things like that. But that monetization was necessary because, creating highly produced, high quality content is a very big dollars game. We need that money, and primarily our source of income is coming directly from our members. And so we kind of had to break that number. And we spent a lot of time learning about how to do that. We had like 2 different phases. First in a couple of countries in South America, then 4 countries in 2 different continents. We learned a lot from that, and we learned that what is important to people is, for example, there are a lot of travel use cases. When you go on a vacation for a few weeks, you don't want to be seen as, oh, now because I'm into physical houses, you don't want to lose that. So we made exceptions for that. We made exceptions for people who are in the military, who are not in their typical household. So we learned a lot from that feedback, and the net result is when we launched in about 100 countries earlier in May, obviously there's a little bit of negative reaction because, we're pushing people to essentially pay a little bit more. But by and large, the number of cancellations have been less than the number of new accounts where people signed up. So it has been, I would say, cautiously, in the direction we were hoping it to be, but we still have to learn a lot, and we still have to continue to grow monetization just because it is coming. And then we hope that money can be put to good use, where we can continue to bring even more exciting stories that people like.
Okay. Yeah, that was a good answer. For someone trying to work at Netflix, whether that is a tech person, as in a programmer or engineer, or a non-tech person, let's say in a managerial role or a consulting role, what advice would you give them so that they maximize their chances of getting Netflix?
Yeah. So there are a few things that. So that's a fairly broad question in terms of what are hiring managers looking for instance.
And I especially want to ask this question in the Indian context. So if someone living in India dreams of working in Netflix,
sure,
how does he go about that?
So there are a couple of. So we do have an office in India, but it is not a technology-focused office. India is, as you know, a very big producer of content. We work very closely with people in Mumbai, in Bollywood, and so we have a lot of people who are in the business, who are in the content world, who are associated with either showrunners, directors, actors, talent. So depending upon what your experience or expertise has been, if you have been in that business, or if you have been in an affiliate of that business, I think there's an opportunity. We keep posting roles on jobs.netflix.com, so you can certainly apply for that. But I'm not really well versed with how hiring happens for that part of the business because I'm very much on the technology side. The technology, all of our roles are based in, by and large, United States mostly. Okay. Now you could. That doesn't mean that you can't, that you can't apply. Of course, you can apply, and if you have the right technical skills, we do the immigration as needed. But mostly we're looking for people who have. It depends on team to team, but a few things that are common. You talked earlier about. You asked me about the culture, and then the culture at Netflix is a little bit unique, and it may not suit everyone, and so. one of the things that we are very upfront and direct about is if you go to jobs.netflix.com/culture, you can read up all these tenets that I talked about and why certain things matter. We are very direct. It is hard to get in and relatively easy to get out of Netflix.
No, really?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It means that we have a culture of giving a lot of direct feedback, and we expect people to respond to that feedback. And so, if somebody is struggling and they're not able to perform well, we will give them feedback, and we'll try to help them try to figure out, what context we can provide. But if they are just not demonstrating that they are able to make that change or they're willing to make that change, then we are comfortable in having the conversation that hey, this is probably not the right role for you. Now, that might mean it's relevant to that particular team, so they may consider an internal transfer to another team, or if it doesn't work out, we may ask them to leave. And that is also something that it's not true of all companies. And we talk of Netflix not as a family, but as a dream team. And in a team, a great player can be cut because they are not currently performing well.
Right.
And so that gives us an opportunity to try to have the best people on the best jobs. But that may not work with the sensibilities of a lot of people. Sometimes people feel that Netflix has a cutthroat place and there's a lot of competition. It's not unlike any of the top tech companies or other top companies in general. If you're performing well, you will get a ton of support, and you just need to show initiative. I mentioned this earlier today in the different session. You need to have initiative. You need to have that grit. That does not mean that you cannot make mistakes. All of us make mistakes. You will fail. You learn from fail. But try to avoid making the same mistake multiple times. Right. Once you learn from it, second time maybe you get from it. But if it starts getting to a pattern, then something is not right. So yeah, so those are some of the things that you may self-select yourself whether you want to apply or not apply. And then of course for the applicability of the job, if there are some technical requirements, you should have that. If you have the right experience in that space, that certainly helps. But other than that, it's a pretty standard interview process like any other tech company, at least on the tech side of it. When we're talking about product manager type interviews, and you may get to maybe write up a memo and then have a meeting where you would defend that memo. So it's sort of like we're trying to get a sense of what it would be like to work with you. Mm-hmm. You would present a memo, and then there'll be people asking questions about it, and then you can defend, you can answer those questions, and that might be part of the interview process.
How is Netflix today different from what it was when you joined Netflix 8 years ago?
Yeah, well, it's bigger. I think we're about 11,000 people, and there were 2,000 when I joined. We had mostly just one office, which was in Silicon Valley, and we had a small 150 people office in Beverly Hills. The big LA office hadn't been set up there. So there was sort of certainly growth in terms of the number of employees, but also in terms of where Netflix was available. It was available in about 30 countries back then when I joined. And
still a big company.
It was still a big company.
Yeah.
It was still a big company, and some of its best shows, it had made the name, right? I interviewed in January of 2015. I joined in March of 2015. And Orange is the New Black and House of Cards, two defining shows, came out in the summer of 2013. So it was about a year and a half. People had started noticing it. They knew about it. I knew about Netflix from a very long time ago. I was a DVD subscriber in the late 1990s when I was a grad student. And then I gave up, and then I came back again. So I knew about it, and I was in the same field before joining Netflix. I was working for a company that was enabling Netflix's competitors. Okay. So we got to know about this space, and we were all looking up to Netflix in many ways. So when the recruiter reached out to me about Netflix and an opportunity to work in machine learning, I didn't want to give up that opportunity. At least wanted to try that out. But it was not yet gone global. So Netflix went global in January of 2016. And
What do you mean went global? It was
yeah,
still in 30 countries.
it was in 30 countries.
So how is it not global?
Well, global as in truly global, in the sense that in January 2016, it became available in 195 countries. So
all of
pretty
a
much
sudden.
every, yes, it was literally all of a sudden. And that was a moment that we all remember because so there's a big consumer electronics show, CES, in Las Vegas every year. You know, you've reviewed tech gadgets, so you would know about CES.
Yes.
And our co-founder and CEO at that time, Reed Hastings, went up on a stage in Las Vegas in CES and quite dramatically announced to the world that, you know, right this moment, yes, that somebody flipped the switch. We are now available in 195 countries, from like 30 odd countries to 195 countries, and we obviously had planned for a whole year and a half to go that, and then that's when Netflix was launched in India also. Now, when we launched a little bit early, before we learned about all the different markets, and that's the thing that I think Reed has done very well. Basically, instilled a culture of fast learning, and so his idea was, let's get into the markets, let's start iterating quickly and seeing what shows are working, what shows are not working, what kind of content we need to create. But from a streaming technology platform perspective, by that time we had the capacity. You know, AWS was a great partner of ours, but the technology was there that we could do the actual distribution everywhere. Now there were a lot of things we learned after that about you know what kind of product features needed to change in a country like India. Broadband was good, but not as good in 2016 as it is now in India. So you know we had to have mobile, and then mobile was a huge focus for us. It still is in India, for instance. And so investing in the right product features, investing in the right content, investing in the right content delivery technologies. So we learned a lot after that. But yes, when I had joined, there was a lot of these changes that were yet to happen. And then I could see a few of these changes. You know, since then, the thing that I've liked about Netflix is that the leadership team has made a lot of big strategic bets that have a very high rate of turning out to be pretty well. We go all the way from that. It started out as a DVD by mail company, but the vision was always for Netflix over the internet. That's why it's called Netflix and not DVDs by mail. Well, anyway, in '90s broadband was not available, and so it was the vision. And so they had that. Then they had the vision to get into streaming before almost anybody was thinking about that. Then they got into original content, then they got into original film, then they decided going into global everywhere quickly, learn from that.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about Netflix producing its own content.
Yeah.
When did that happen, and what was sort of the thought process behind that?
Yeah, so that happened around, I'll say a little over 10 years ago.
Okay.
Our first Netflix original show was a small show based out of Scandinavia. The show was called Lilyhammer. Not many people have watched that show, but it was a good show. And that came out, I think it came out in early 2012, but the two big seminal hits were House of Cards and Orange is the New Black. And the reasoning behind getting into original content was really very simple, right? When we started out doing streaming, we didn't have we had no content of our own. Yeah. And the thing with video content is that the rights are super fragmented. Every geography, within the same geography, there's like, for this kind of content, for this kind of thing, there's all sorts of windows. So there was no such thing as a global television network. Yeah. Right? You can't just have, this show I want. Okay, I don't know how do I watch that show if I'm in a different country. So there was a desire to standardize unit that we found because there's a monetization opportunity, and also because you want to have the opportunity of storytellers from everywhere get access to audience everywhere. But then from a very pure business and monetary perspective, as shows that were like in the back catalog of networks, they wanted to monetize it, so they licensed it to Netflix, and then they started becoming hits. One example was Breaking Bad. It was a huge
Right,
hit
right.
on Netflix. There was other shows that were not such a good hit on their shows, but then they became hit just because of the ease of use, or whatever the product was
And
bringing.
maybe they got exposure to certain
Yes.
countries which previously they did not
Yeah,
have.
so there's that also.
Yeah.
But what was happening was, at some point, our leadership understood that from a strategic perspective, the networks, while they were making good money, Netflix started becoming bigger and we started getting leverage. That at some point they would realize that they are not going to license shows to us, because now Netflix was becoming more of a competitor rather than a revenue generator, rather than just a revenue generator. We were always a very good revenue generator for them. So it was always a hard decision for them to say no to the money that we were giving.
Right.
But from our perspective, we have to, if that's the primary source of our revenue through the member fees, we had to ensure that we have, global, perpetual, or at least exclusive rights to these shows. And it was getting harder and harder to acquire those for long terms. And so that was the next logical step. Can we create our own content? We were working with the same set of people. We were generating quite a bit of cash at that point. And so it was only natural that we would get into it. But I mean, it was a bold decision, and it was a decision that could have gone spectacularly wrong. But ultimately, it boils down to execution, and the team executed well.
So as of right now, what has better margins? Your own content or the content that you license?
Yeah, I can't really answer that question because I honestly don't know the answer to that question. There's a lot of transparency at Netflix. If I probably go looking for it for a particular show, I can find it, but it's not my area. But I would say that we measure not the number of content pieces. We still license in many geographies, but it's like how much viewing those shows are getting is our primary metric, right? In terms of how much viewing a particular Netflix original content. Even that Netflix original has actually many layers, because it could be a co-produced show with somebody else, or it was a show somebody else produced, but we acquired the license, or it was like something that we completely initiated from scratch and produced. So there's a whole flavor to it. We definitely have majority of all viewing on Netflix originals by far, but there are some pockets and geographies where some type of content, like a local language content, is very popular, and we just haven't built enough of a content generation,
So you just license.
So then we have to license locally.
Okay, so I'm just going to say a phrase, and you tell me what you think about it. Netflix versus Hollywood.
I don't think it's a versus. Netflix, well, in many ways, Netflix is part of Hollywood, and Netflix can't exist without Hollywood. Say they are, the creative talent and the storytellers are the people who basically make those stories, and Netflix, the product side of it, our responsibility is to make sure that it.
But at some point, do you not see that Hollywood is one industry creating content, and Netflix is a global industry creating content?
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So no, I look. Netflix is, Netflix is some part Hollywood, some part Bollywood, some part everywhere else, because it is such a to us, and it's a unique combination, because it's not only are we creating all of these stories that are created locally and loved everywhere, but we have, we can't make progress, and we can't make those amazing content without working with the creative people in all of these countries where they have a rich culture of storytelling. Hollywood in America is one, but there's so many countries and all over the continent, in APAC, in EMEA, some amazing, Korea has been, really great for us, and lots of stories that are coming up from there.
Right. Okay, so one question is, and you can think about it, is that any product or any service or any company that has such a wide global reach is of value to people of power, right? So, is there, and I'm sure there is, but what I want to know is how Netflix handles that. So, are there people in positions of power, whether in the United States or in other countries, try to influence the narrative, the political narrative of certain issues globally through Netflix, and how Netflix handles that. Or Netflix itself has, if you are aware of, certain biases towards certain kind of inclinations.
Yeah, I don't think there is a set policy in Netflix that says we are going to fund a particular type of political content, for instance. We try to be as inclusive as possible of all ideologies, of all people, because everybody everybody likes and needs to be entertained, right? We are trying to fight boredom in some ways. But humans make decisions, and humans inevitably have certain leanings, and sometimes those leanings show up. Um, but the thing is, you may or may not experience Netflix in a certain way because of personalization, and if you watch one type of content, it's quite likely that similar kind of content may start showing up in your recommendations. So that doesn't mean that we don't have content available which have other.
Which is on the other side.
Absolutely. So there are stories.
So don't you think this is creating echo chambers?
Echo chambers,
which is a problem not just for Netflix but for all social platforms.
Yeah, but I mean the thing is, we are one big difference from our other social media for Netflix is that we are not creating user generated content, and so our content is highly produced, vetted, validated from a perspective that we feel confident that this is something that can provide a value, an entertainment value to the company. And our motto is entertain the world, right? So we are primarily in the business to entertain. We're not a news service. We're not a public service announcement entity. People may find something informative. They may learn about, let's say, the climate change through some story that some.
So for example, if I have to be more precise, if there is a show launching on Netflix that is, let's say, Netflix is co-producing it with somebody, and the other party is someone who might have a certain agenda. Like they would want the public to have certain opinions on a certain topic.
Yeah.
So will Netflix, for example, fact check the story or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time these stories come to us. We give a tremendous amount of freedom to and to the creative vision of our talent. Ultimately, the decision whether to have something on Netflix or not boils down to a lot of factors, which a very important one is the show expected to be watched by a lot of people?
Yes.
If it's not, I mean, there's no point in taking a very strong stance for something that is not even going to generate viewing. But even so, there can be controversial content, and sometimes we want to operate in a lot of countries because we value the ability for people in every country to have access to Netflix. And if we get an official takedown request from the official government channels because it's the law of the land that we comply to that. So for instance, sometimes we've taken down content because the governments have reached out to us. But other than that, we don't want to get into the business of shoving an agenda. But that doesn't mean that stories that may appear to you left-leaning or right-leaning might not show up on the service. There are definitely stories that may push for that. But we try to take an approach where we say, you know what, this is the creative vision, and we want to enable that creative vision, and people don't like it, they will not watch it, and that's the risk that Netflix is taking. We give a guaranteed, we do a deal.
So related questions, you do all the, Netflix does all the market research to make sure that a particular show will be watched by a certain number of people.
There's a lot of there's some market research, some we use, again, the technology side helps. We use machine learning to predict this kind of show, this kind of a storyline. What is the likelihood of that getting to be big? And we have a lot of history of shows with similar.
So there's a joke that sort of floats around regarding Netflix, is that Now, I don't know how true it is. You might, comment on that. Is Netflix is known to cancel its best or the most loving shows, while it lets other shows continue, which is not so much loved by people.
Yeah, it is a joke.
Really?
Because see, the thing is, people feel that way, and I can definitely empathize with that. Uh, because people are looking at it from the perspective of their favorite show that got cancelled. But their favorite show might be really 0.00001 percenter in the sense that there may not be that many people who may really be watching it. Ultimately, some of the biggest drivers, there are a lot of things that go into renewal decisions for a show. One of the big ones, as you can imagine, is how much viewing it's getting. And it is competing with a lot of great shows. And sometimes it happens that it doesn't get the kind of viewers. Or it's not just that
I
the
think it
viewers.
does. That's why people are.
Well,
upset
the thing
about
is, it's very rare that something that has very big viewership gets cancelled. It's
Okay.
very rare. Usually, it's just that the people who the people who like a particular show that got cancelled often are very vocal about it, but the numbers often don't support that. But ultimately, we have to sort of we have to balance out the budget in terms of figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And some shows will get cancelled, and we are hoping that as stewards of people's money, we are putting those dollars to the best use, and we can create another good show which we expect to.
Right. Okay, just last two questions. So Netflix is very.
I should have said this at the start of it that all of these views are my own personal
Yeah, of
views.
course.
I do work for Netflix and I'm passionate about Netflix, but I am not officially representing Netflix in any way. So the views are mine.
Right, right. So Netflix has been, I think, always has been very liberal when it comes to, by liberal not in a political sense, but liberal in a sense, what sort of content it shows, and that might include a lot of, you could say, 18 plus content or adult content. So is there, and I think that has sort of, that line has been, that periphery has become wider and wider as to what sort of shows are acceptable in Netflix. So is there a red line within Netflix to what sort of shows or what sort of scenes it'll show and what it won't?
Yeah, again, I am not the best person to figure out, where that line is, if there is a line or not. I think the people who work on the content side of the business have a much better appreciation of that. What I can say is, uh, I mean, there are things that are obviously illegal that you'll not find on Netflix. There are certain things that are racy or edgier, and there's a fine balance to be had in terms of enabling a creative vision, and recognizing that certain things may or may not be appropriate for a particular country or a region, and but we also want to enable people to make those individual decisions based on informed choices. So we try to be upfront with the kind of content and the kind of rating that it would have, what kind of reasons are for a higher age-based rating, whether it's racy content or violence, or there's a whole lot of other different categories. We list that out at the start of the show. But we believe in the value of choice and letting people making those private decisions versus broad censorship. But then, as I mentioned earlier, when we get an official through the official channels, if we get a takedown request from a particular government, then we will comply.
Right. Netflix has been one of those companies which have changed people's lifestyles, like iPhone did or Apple did with iPhone, right? So there's a term like Netflix and chill, right? So obviously that has been fantastic for your company in terms of growth and revenue, and also the kind of entertainment you Netflix has been able to bring to the masses. But it has led to fundamental shift in people's lifestyles. For example, children might go out to play in the playground 30 years from now, but today people just might spend more time in front of the television watching Netflix. So that is what do you personally, what do you think about that?
Yeah, look,
Is that a good change? Is that a bad change?
Anything new or anything different. I think the one word I would say here is moderation is your friend. We want people to be responsible for it. We have put in some controls in the product, which basically want to make sure that hey, while we can make it easy for you to go to the next show quickly, but there's an opportunity if you're not watching, there's a pop-up that'll say, hey, are you still watching? Things like that. But ultimately, we want to give that choice to our users to decide, when is right for them to stop and make the choice of doing things with their time. Netflix is by no means the only or the exclusive
No, but for
controller of
example,
that.
right,
There's
right.
there's social media,
Correct.
there's TV,
Correct.
there's a different. It's not just Netflix, but I
No, but for
acknowledge that it is one of those
Right, right.
things, and
So, for example, you work at machine learning platform,
Mm.
and the entire or the fundamental purpose of machine learning is to maximize engagement, right? So you are
That's
very
not
much.
that's not the only purpose. That's one of the signal
Right.
that goes into it.
So
There
you
are things.
are magnetizing people towards your platform. So I'm being very frank here.
Yeah, I know. I think it's entirely reasonable for you to ask that question. And for a subscription business, you want to make sure that people find value in that subscription at the end of the day. Whether it's $5, $10, $20, depending upon which geography you're from. That's a lot of hard-earned money, and we want to give them value back. And then how much value they're getting out of it. Are they experiencing the right emotions? You're making an assumption that somebody is watching something, it is just taking time away, and that's not necessarily positive in any way. I mean, there's a lot of informative shows that the people are getting out of it. There's a lot of emotion that people can experience through that. So there are some upsides to it, but I acknowledge that anything done in extreme is never good, and so we can't put in a control say that
Right.
you're gonna watch it for 30 minutes
Mm.
and then after that you cannot stream it. Like many other things in life, I think human judgment has to be brought into figuring out what is right for you. We certainly want people to watch our shows, but we want them to watch it responsibly. And to the extent that our algorithms, yes, the algorithms are actually looking at a lot of signals. For instance, we often value something far more when you start one show and you complete that show rather than spending a lot of maybe a lot more time but just skipping very quickly, because then you're not having an engaging and enriching experience. And so the algorithms are not purely looking at, okay, how many total minutes was I able to get this person to watch. And there are other things about if you really like, you can thumbs up, and then now we have a double thumbs up if you really love the show. That is a very powerful explicit signal. And then we'd much rather have you recommend a show of that nature rather than other shows that you have just watched but not really liked. So right, you could have much longer duration of watching, but if you had like one show a month that you double thumbs up, that is a much stronger signal to the algorithm. So we have tweaked it to the point that we want to maximize joy, and again, the argument of quality over quantity. So we want to maximize joy while you're watching rather than simply how many hours you've watched.
Right.
But we all should practice. We all should practice moderation. We all should go out and get exercise, and we all should do practice any of these engagements in moderation.
One of the beauties of Netflix, as opposed to something like YouTube or television, was that if you're paying a subscription, you no longer have to worry about ads. Mm-hmm. But that's no longer the case.
That's no longer the case if you want to have if you are on a budget, in the sense that you want to still experience the value of Netflix, but you're willing to tolerate some ads for a much lower significant price point. So that is the trade-off, but you still absolutely have the opportunity to continue to experience Netflix without ads.
Right.
And you have multiple tiers to support that.
Okay, so last question. Can you maybe share what Netflix would be like in the future? So, are you guys going to explore something different like gaming
Well,
or
the gaming future is here. Netflix has games. A lot of people don't know about it, but we have games on mobile.
oh really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Well, there you go. So we really need to do a better job at bringing that up. But there's a games row, and you can play games on it. It's a very early
So
exploration.
that's your own games which you created
We have acquired a few gaming studios,
okay.
and so yes, we are creating our own games, but we also licensed games. We're very early on, and gaming takes a while to develop. And
So are you planning to compete with, let's say, Xbox or PlayStation?
I mean, we're very early on when we gaming is one big part of the entertainment, right, domain. So when we say our motto is to entertain the world, we cannot ignore such a big part of the piece. We'll see where it goes. We're very early on, but I think there's some unique opportunities that we've had. And so, for instance, we don't have ads on it. We don't monetize in-game purchases, and we really focus on really core book gameplay, and that's something that our creators who are writing games for us. We have about like 30 to 50 different games on Netflix. Some of them are exclusive to Netflix. And right now it's only on mobile, but over time we'll probably expand. Um, but we're very, very early on, and it's an industry that's been, I don't know, 4 decades in, 5 decades in. So they're big players. We might be able to compete with some of the big guys, but we'll have to try to figure out what those modalities are. Right now, we're really focused on connecting the dots, and the power that I see in the long-term future for Netflix games is really the opportunity to connect a show-based IP to a game of the same IP. Right. So we have the rights to the show, and then we can create a game
for that,
and then it can be. So that's
right.
that's the vision, but pulling it off, it's not easy, and we'll take some time to learn the industry to see what works in our environment. And the mobile device is still a fairly constrained solution, right? You need to take in a lot of input from the user in gaming. So we're experimenting there, but yeah, we're in it.
Yeah. Okay. There are some shows on Netflix where something happens in a scene and then you can choose, right?
Yes.
Did he pick a spoon or did he pick up something else?
Yes.
And then based on that, it will show some other scene.
Yeah, there are some shows.
How did that come about? What's the
we
vision
experimented with that a little bit. And the idea is that, so the genesis for this is back in the days, I don't know, you were probably not born, but there used to be books like that. There literally were books where it had this divergent narratives, and you could choose which one you could go to, and then you literally say, and then, oh, you choose this, then go to page number this, and you go to this, and you go to page number that.
Okay.
It was a thing. It didn't, it didn't quite work as well in the books industry, I guess. Otherwise, you'd be knowing about it. But this interactive branch narrative is not. We just wanted to bring that to this medium, and we had the ability to choose. So we've experimented with a few shows.
How did it work out?
It's not a very material part by any means. I don't quite know, how often are we investing in shows like that. But one big one that I do remember was Black Mirror Bandersnatch. So Black Mirror is a show, but there was one specific story, Bandersnatch, and that was that was a good story also, and had this interactive branch narrative thing going on. You should check it out if you haven't watched it. But yeah, it's not a huge part of our content.
Okay.
Why?
So what is Netflix going to look like 10, 20, 30 years from now?
Oh, if only I know. There are a few things.
What's the vision? What's the vision?
Yeah. The vision that Reed has put forward is that we want to be able to be telling the stories, enabling the games, enabling whatever other experiences throughout the world in whatever devices or environments people have access to, and it's at a press of a button or what is the equivalent of whatever is the equivalent of that,
Right.
10, 20 years from now. We want to, the thing that will not change is the core parts of our three-word motto, which is entertain the world. So it will still be something in anything that fits into the entertainment domain, and the world means will continue to be global. The modalities of how we are entertaining, what form of
Is this
storytelling.
metaverse a part of it?
Maybe we're not excluding it, but the metaverse has to become real before we start investing time and energy into it. It may become real. It may become the dominant way of how people engage.
So Apple
But-
recently launched its Vision Pro.
Yeah.
So how do you see Netflix entering into wearables like smart glasses or things like that, where people would watch a
Yeah. I mean,
Netflix show
we can
directly with them?
experiment with these things, but the thing is that there's such a tremendous amount of opportunity available in the device formats that we have access to right now. In the US, we are like less than 10% of overall viewing, if you include linear TV. And so just the opportunity in the space we have available with our existing mediums within just on-demand and movies, when today's devices, that there's a lot of room for us to grow, and we can probably experiment with it when these wearables, IoT, metaverses start gaining significant traction. Right? Maybe we will be playing with some of these devices right now. Netflix has a long history of being super wide in terms of the device coverage. In fact, that was one of the unique reasons why we were so successful early on, about 10 years ago, is because we had a wide. I mean, there was like 1,500 different types of devices, or so completely different types, not just model versions.
Okay.
That we supported, and we probably still support several of those. So we will do it, but then we have to do the ROI assessment. On if you're going to invest something, then there's an opportunity cost of not creating 5 great shows on existing, where like 80% of the public is today. So maybe when the balance starts tilting towards it, we will have a story there.
Thank you so much for taking out the time. It was wonderful talking to you, and I think we covered more than what I was expecting.
No,
right?
you threw some curveballs at me. I'll give you that. So I thoroughly enjoyed this thing. I hope I've answered some of your questions, and I did the best I can. Again,
It's wonderful
views are
talking to
mine,
you. Yes, yeah.
not necessarily of my employer, but you can always have me talking about Netflix. It's been great for me, but it's something that I've enjoyed spending a big part of my career at. So thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much.
All right, all the best.
Thank you.